Europe's biggest economy is undergoing Europe's biggest lockdown, though for not much longer, with many shops in Germany allowed to reopen next week. So decided Chancellor Merkel, a scientist by training. She had spoken to all 16 of her state governors, and afterwards she talked of fragile success.
We've achieved something that was at first in no way certain, namely that our doctors and nurses, all those in healthcare and the hospitals, are not overburdened. But I must emphasise this is a fragile, intermediate success.
As for education, well, Germany plans to follow neighbouring Denmark, which began opening schools today. Though the Germans will prioritise those sitting exams, and they won't reopen their schools till May the 4th. Germany's first big virus outbreak was reported after a carnival here at Heinsberg, near the Dutch border. At first, the Germans had almost 3 times more cases than the British, but their lockdown began about a week ahead of the UK's.
We did the right thing, honestly. So our authority closed schools very early, closed events, closed pubs and so on. So we were a bit earlier than, for example, the UK and the Netherlands and Belgium.
It also helped that many early German infections were from European ski resorts. That meant that their average age was lower, and so they were more likely to survive. More significantly, Berlin's main hospital tracked the news from China and developed a test for the virus as early as mid-January. The more tests, the quicker you can isolate or treat infections. The pharmaceutical giant Bayer filmed for us this lab, which can perform and return up to 1,000 tests a day, while the UK has blamed shortages of labs, chemicals and swabs.
If you test more, you find more people. If you test less, you have a lot of people that are infected, but you don't register them. And that is also dangerous.
More labs are testing, and so are more GPs. This one told us there's no shortage of kits, and that she's proud of the German government's response. Germany's conducted 1.7 million tests, more than 3 times as many per head of population as the UK, which has carried out almost 400,000. Germany started with 621 acute care beds per 100,000 people. In the UK, it was just 228. Germany's death rate is 2.5% per 100 confirmed virus cases. The UK's 12.8%. Over 3,200 deaths have been reported in Germany, compared with almost 13,000 in the UK.
We all know that Germany got ahead in terms of its ability to do testing for the virus, and there's a lot to learn from that, and we've been trying to learn the lessons from that.
It's sad that I have to say this, but the UK government underestimated the threat of corona in the beginning.
The Germans are so flush with intensive care beds that they've accepted patients from France, Italy and Spain, and they've donated 40 ventilators to the UK. There have been mistakes, with Germany's health minister apologising after he failed the social distancing test inside this packed hospital lift. But this is a country which responded faster and more effectively and is now on its way out of lockdown much quicker than most.
Well, we can debate whether there are any shafts of sunlight, with talks of the lockdown beginning to ease in some places. But here in the UK, the bad news on the high street continued, with 2,000 jobs going at brands Oasis and Warehouse. Well, to talk about the state of the economy, I'm joined by Mariana Mazzucato, Professor in the Economics of Innovation and Public Value at University College London, and by the Conservative MP and former Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Harriet Baldwin. Welcome to you both. Harriet Baldwin, you were at the Treasury Select Committee earlier. What was the mood there in terms of the UK's economic outlook?
Well, I think the report yesterday from the Office for Budget Responsibility was very sobering, because it shows the sharpness of the decline that the economy is going through at the moment as we lock down. And today we were focusing really on the bridge that both the Bank of England, but also the regulators and the Treasury have put in place to try and help everyone through this period so that we can come out of the lockdown in a way that gives the maximum chances to our economy to recover from this sharp downturn.
OK. Mariana Mazzucato, you've argued that this pandemic is actually an opportunity to rethink capitalism. What does that look like?
Well, I think that there's different issues here. One is that both what we've seen, before the crisis, during and after can give us all sorts of lessons. In terms of before, those workers that are being most affected are those, in fact, in the gig economy, which we've known for a very long time is problematic, but it has been revealed more than ever. As Martin Luther King once said, you judge people during hard times, not good times. And I think the way that we've actually set up our work structures, which make people very, not resilient to a crisis like this, but also the fact that we've underfinanced actually organizations like the NHS. The cuts, I think, since 2015 have been over 1 billion, means that when you have a crisis like this, you can't just throw money at it if it, in the meantime, has become weakened. So we need solid and resilient structures in both the private and the public sector. And very concretely, there's a real opportunity now to frame, for example, the bailouts in such a way that actually have conditions attached, which get us the kind of, if you want, corporate governance structures, which are more dynamic, but also that are really reinvesting income back into production instead of being siphoned out, for example, through share repurchases, but also some of the ways that the government is planning on helping companies, for example, by helping the wage bills by about 80%, that has to be conditional on the companies not laying off the workers themselves. And it's incredible that that level of detail hasn't actually been structured yet, and that's going to be a problem because you shouldn't just hand out money.
Let me put that to Harriet Baldwin then. Do you agree with the idea that there should be conditions attached to bailouts for companies?
Well, I would strongly disagree with the point that it's not going to be capitalism that gets us into the economic recovery. Of course, we're going to need a vibrant private sector. And I think it's very important to emphasise how we have actually been investing in our NHS throughout this period, and that the NHS is getting all the funding that it needs and has been, I think, responding incredibly well to this challenge, and we thank them for all the work that they're doing. I do agree that we've got to work collaboratively with other countries in terms of development on the science, and I think that we can all learn from each other as scientists across the world, and with the UK in a leading role in terms of our contribution announced today to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, for example. I think there's an important role that we can play internationally to research these things together and to find a vaccine and cure for this terrible new disease as quickly as possible.
Mariana, you heard there the reluctance to attach any conditions to a bailout. I mean, you're not going to be able to make this case, are you? Governments aren't going to take it up.
Yeah, I mean, just to come in quickly on the NHS, everybody's thanking the NHS workers. Of course they should be, but they also have to be strengthened. You don't send soldiers to the battleground barefoot, right? So the weakness in some ways of our public health system, as great as it is, and yes, we all clap on Thursdays, it is an insult to simply clap and not also to strengthen the system itself so it can continually, systemically actually be strong. So it will be prepared also for the next crisis, because unfortunately this won't be the last. Now, the conditions, there's many countries that are talking about it. This is about doing capitalism better. It's not about capitalism or, socialism. So across the world, there's different types of conditions being attached. And it's fundamental in order actually to drive the kind of economy we also want post-COVID, which is a more inclusive one. You don't just come in and bail out companies. You actually help them transform in order to also deliver the kinds of working conditions. But also, we shouldn't forget that about 2 months ago, we weren't just thanking, health workers. We were thanking the firemen, the flood workers in Venice. So there's also this whole climate problem, which is the context within which both the financial crisis happened recently and now this particular health crisis. So the conditions could also be for the airlines, for example, which are going to be bailed out, they also become, more green. Why not?
Okay, well, let's just put that to Harriet Baldwin. Harriet, specifically there, talking about airline industry, do you think there should be any climate change conditions attached to any bailout of the airline industry?
I think that in terms of the climate work, it's still very important to focus on the fact that we do need to get to net zero by 2050. Of course we do. We mustn't lose sight of that as we respond to this temporary crisis. But I do think that in terms of this bridge across the economic chasm that we're going to go through, that we do need to focus on making sure businesses are ready to get back and fueling our economy when we
Harriet
get out the
Baldwin,
other
I'm
side.
really sorry, but we're running out of time. I'm going to have to leave it there. And Mariana Mazzucato, thank you very much.